Hello, Robert. It's good to see you.
Good morning, Nicola. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Thank you for joining us for this little chat about your books and about your Indiegogo campaign. And we have the blog post up on mikeandpen.com with all the specifics, but I thought I would like to hear you talk more about your experiences.
I'm
Um,
happy to oblige.
Thanks. Thank you. And first of all, the third culture kit, you came from Germany.
Well, let me just back up a tad, Nicola.
Yeah.
I always like to start it this way. My parents and my brother and I were born in the same city, but different country. How is that possible? Well, back in the 1900s, borders changed all the time with the different wars, different skirmishes, and so forth. And so my parents were born in what was called Marburg, Austria. And my brother and I were born in Maribor, Yugoslavia, the same city. Border changed 20 kilometers after World War I.
20 kilometers made that much difference.
Yes, he did, yeah. My father was served in the military back in World War II. He was captured by the Germans, served like he was in a POW camp for a year and a half, eventually released. And things are really harsh back then after the Second World War ended. My parents sought a better life. We moved to West Germany for a time, looking for better opportunities. And then my father, who was an electrical engineer, had this opportunity of coming to Canada in 1967. So that was quite the process you can imagine to work through immigration and being accepted. So I remember I was 11, my brother was 10, and we came by the White Star Line. It was the Sylvania, I believe was the name of the ship. Nothing like the ocean liners today, but it was fine. And we came into the port of Montreal in October 1967 after a 7-day voyage. I still remember it because Expo was on at the time. That was my introduction to Canada.
Oh, wow. Big party.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we didn't get to take part because once we cleared immigration, we had maybe an hour or so, and then it was off to catch a train bound for Edmonton.
Oh, that's where your dad's job was.
Yeah. So my father was there. And then a couple of years later, he would always look for more opportunities. He got an offer from Atomic Energy in Pinawa, Manitoba.
Oh.
So we moved to Pinawa in 1969. January 1969, minus 40. Oh, was that brutal?
Edmonton is shocking enough for cold, but
it's cold enough, yeah, but that just happened to be one of those worst winters that I recall. Minus 40. Wow. Yeah.
You remember anything about being on the boat?
Not a whole lot. I mean, my brother and I, we love to explore. We walked all over the ship. We met a few kids our own age, and we played typical games, just making do. And then we all got seasick. So it kind of shortened our exploration. But yeah.
I'm sure that there was some North Atlantic weather in October that would make anybody sick.
Yeah, my parents told us that it was not a storm, but it was rough enough.
Yeah, I'm sure. And then the train.
Yeah, so
what do you remember?
The train. I don't remember anything about the train. Apparently, we stopped in Winnipeg briefly, and then continued on to Edmonton. And then once we're in Pinawa, my parents made sure that both my brother and I, Andy, we were involved in sports and all kinds of school activities. And that's where my love for aviation kind of really came through, because I joined, well, both of us joined the Air Cadets, the local Air Cadet chapter in Beausejour. And my brother only lasted a year. He had found other interests and did that. But I stuck it out. And the Air Cadet program, even today, they offer all kinds of courses for leadership, for training. And of course, one of the perks is that every year they allot so many the opportunity of getting a private pilot license. So, and I was fortunate that year, 1973. I got my scholarship, went to Brandon, Manitoba. That's what got my wings.
Yeah. Has a uniform and everything.
No, like we had flight suits, but
Yeah,
we were still, yeah.
it's your air cadet uniform.
Air cadets, yes.
Yeah.
And so, and after that, Nicola, I was able to keep up my private license by taking up family and friends and all kinds of people that I met just to keep up my rating, because you're obligated to fly so much every year to keep your license in effect.
Mm-hmm. So you owned airplanes too?
I didn't own an airplane. I rented.
You rented
the poor man's way of doing it.
If it keeps you in the air, it's worth it.
Yeah. And my desire was to join the military, become a fighter pilot. Of course, the regulations back then were quite different. You had to have perfect vision, which I did not have. And now everybody can get laser surgery, but back then I didn't. And so my lifespan went a different way. I ended up joining the police force in 1980 and did that for 26 years.
Wow.
And that's where my writing took off, believe it or not.
You learned to write in the police?
I learned to hone my writing skills.
So you learned to write fiction by writing fact.
Yeah.
Was fiction sometimes stranger than fact?
Yeah. Truth is stranger than fiction. Absolutely.
Yeah. So the Crown Attorney came to appreciate that you could write well and you could describe what you needed to get across and the evidence and everything really well.
Yeah. And even prior to that, every report was scrutinized by one of the sergeants. And if they didn't like what was in there, or if you made too many grammatical errors or spelling mistakes, they'd rip it up. This is all back in the era when you had typewriters, none of these fancy computers yet. So you can imagine taking maybe an hour to write a report on a typewriter. The sergeant didn't like it. He rips it up, start over. So you learn fast.
Yeah. That's a really brutal school of editing.
Mm-hmm. One particular sergeant that I call Nicola, he had his red pen and he would just circle on your paper the errors. Not like today where you have copy and paste. You can just rearrange paragraphs. You can edit stuff out. It was all like two-finger typing, 4 if you're lucky.
Did you learn how to type in the police force as well, or had you already learned how? You never learned to type.
No time for that.
So you still type your manuscripts with 2 to 4 fingers?
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's what I'm used to, and the thing is, when you're writing as an author, and I know you're quite familiar with that, you stop quite often. You picture something in your mind and you reword it. So it's not like you're a typist from days gone by where you have to do 60 or 80 words per minute. And an author often stops and thinks about what they're doing.
It's not like you lost any fingers with the Winnipeg release.
No.
Yeah. And how about in the airplanes? Did you have any exciting adventures in the airplanes?
I recall one of my highlights was flying from Winnipeg to Churchill, Manitoba, way up north with a friend. And this was in the summer, I think it was 1993. And we got to see beluga whales and all kinds of animals, foxes, reindeer from the air, but no polar bears because they were all out on the ice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a phenomenal trip. Yeah.
Amazing. What time of the year was that?
July.
So
I managed to keep my pilot's license for about 25 years. And, it basically was an expensive hobby. I always had a dream of going further with that, possibly within the police force. But they already had 2 dedicated pilots for their surveillance programs. So I was always the odd man out.
Those pilots lasted the 25 years and didn't give you a chance. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
And you said that you flew out to Vancouver once too.
I did. 1986 for Expo. I took some family in a small single-engine aircraft all the way from Winnipeg. So we went from Winnipeg to Regina, refueled, to Lethbridge, refueled, to Kelowna, refueled, and to just outside of Vancouver in Pitt Meadows. Flew through the mountains, or actually in between.
Oh, because you couldn't get high enough to get over them.
That's right, because there's always clouds, and yeah. So unless you're flying, like a jet or something like that, you're limited below 10,000 feet.
Below 10,000 feet.
Yeah, I was flying around 8,000, I believe.
Incredible. Some of those mountains are higher.
Oh, yeah, 12, 13,000, yeah.
That must have been incredible. Did you see foxes and beluga whales?
Yeah, Expo 86 was quite the show for Canada, highlighting, hosting different countries and so forth. Yeah, it was exciting. Yeah.
And then you flew all the way back again.
About 10 days later, yeah.
Oh.
In one piece, hit no mountains.
Yeah, we're very glad that you hit no mountains.
Yeah.
Tell us a little more about your experience with your dad writing his memoir.
That was really interesting because my father would tell us and friends little bits and pieces, little snippets of his experiences during the war. And he wasn't afraid to talk about them. And as I grew up, many of these stories were very familiar. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s that I started paying more attention, particularly as a writer. And so I remember I approached my dad about it. And he said, well, who'd want to hear that stuff? I wasn't any general or politician. I said, yeah, but you survived the war. You saw some stuff. So then he took it seriously. And over a 2-year period together, interviewing him on the phone or in person, we collaborated and came up with his biography. Yeah.
Did you record him?
A little bit, yeah. So
that's
so
the
here's
book.
the book.
Triumph Through Adversity. Yeah, I've read it, and it's a harrowing tale.
Yeah, and the thing is, he kept a really good perspective. I think a lot of veterans, whether it was World War II or the Korean War or Vietnam, lived through some harrowing times, and they just bottle it up, and then it would come out later in different ways. They tried to cope as best as they could. With my dad, he was always an optimist, and he sought the better things in life. And that came through in the book, I believe.
It did. Yeah. So can you give us one of the stories from the book?
One of the stories.
Do you have a favorite story?
Sure. It was kind of interesting because living in a small town like Pinawa, you can imagine it was full of scientists and doctors and physicists and of course engineers. And so my dad, being a foreigner coming from Europe, especially Eastern Europe, right, because he spoke with an accent, and he was kind of looked down upon. And I remember my dad telling me how one time he was applying for a car loan at the local bank. And he was quite optimistic that would have been his first car. So he was a Chevy Bel Air. He was all excited. So he applied for a loan and he was turned down. And he couldn't understand why. And then it turned out that the bank manager used to play cards like poker with friends. And some of those friends that he played with, this is the bank manager, worked indirectly or directly with my father, and he gave a poor report to my dad because they were biased. So based on that, he turned him down. But my father was not to be deterred. He wasn't angry. He was, of course, unhappy. So he went to the credit union. They gave him a loan. But you can see how a situation like that could really, make you mad, and make you, look for a way of getting even. But that was my dad's nature. He always sought the best in people, and he just found a way to work through things.
I hear geese in the background. Is this the geese or the?
Yeah, there's Canada geese.
Yeah, your dad is remarkable for working through situations like that, and not holding any bitterness. That's a strong.
That is remarkable. Yeah, that he, he always saw the glasses, not just half empty, but always filling up, filled to the brim.
And I see that in you too. You have no bitterness in you.
I try not.
We have all the information about the Indiegogo, but can you say how your experience with that has been so far?
I'll give you the kind of little background. I remember way back in 2009 or 2010, I saw a documentary on TV by National Geographic where they first mentioned the two brothers, Reimer and Walter Horton, who developed this state-of-the-art, that was way ahead of their time, delta wing-shaped jet aircraft for the German military program. I'd never even heard of it until that point. So that was a fascinating documentary. And afterwards, I looked it up. I did some research on the internet. And it was tremendous what these two aircraft designers came up with. And eventually, they built a couple of prototypes, one of which crashed. So that gave me the idea. And so I wanted to write a historical fiction novel based upon this plane. And of course, I intermingled characters, and there was romance also thrown into it. And my hero is an American, actually.
Mm-hmm. Why did you choose the hero to be American? Not British or even Canadian.
There is a Canadian in there, but I just chose because the Americans had such a major influence. Once they entered the war after Pearl Harbor, I mean, the Americans made the big push, especially in Europe, to fight the Nazis. And so, I thought it would be appropriate if the hero was an American, and he teams up with a plucky German woman to work through things.
Are they based on real people that you know?
Those two are not, but there are real people in the novel. For example.
Go ahead. No, yeah. I know that the real people, that the Horton brothers and Goering and all that, but people that the Jack and what was the lady's name? Hilda. Like, are they people? Did you draw from the people around you?
Not exactly. They're from my imagination. Jack exemplifies a typical American bomber or fighter pilot. He's got that reserved, humble, character. And the bad guy, the antagonist, Horst Cluster, is a very much egotistical and self-serving kind of a person. Yeah. So they're from my imagination.
Oh, you have a vivid imagination. Yeah. I wondered maybe you would like to do a reading from the manuscript.
When we first meet Jack, how would that be? Captain Jack swaggered, feeling fatigued, yawned, and looked to the east at the unfolding dawn. Although the rising sun registered with his visual senses, what he saw in his mind's eye nearly overshadowed the splendor of cascading yellow and red colors emanating from the rising fireball. It was late October, 1944, and Jack, part of the U.S. Air Force 322nd Bombardment Group, was preparing himself for another important mission. Jack, only 32 years old, had been recently promoted, was now a new squadron leader, replacing Captain Bill Worthy, whose plane had been shot down during a recent mission. Jack, standing at just over 6 feet, stretched and turned away from the rising sun and glanced at the row of hangars. 2 months ago, they had been moved to Beauvais Airfield, a recently acquired base in northern France, roughly 80 kilometers north of Paris. Okay.
There you go. Thank you.
So that's a little snippet. That's where we get to meet him. So he comes across as, he cares about his crew. He's unassuming, he's faithful, he's loyal, and he's humble.
That's good.
How about the bad guy?
Yeah, let's hear about him.
Yeah. The car was parked on a side street in Berlin, where he had disembarked 30 minutes earlier, but the driver, Helmut Köhler, was nowhere in sight. Horst Cluster swore softly. He approached from the far side, debating whether to go look for him or just wait. But then he spotted the fair hair over the headdress. The head moved slightly, then slumped forward, and with a jerk came up again. Horst couldn't believe it. The man was dozing off in the front seat. Köhler, the driver, had clearly ignored his instructions to stay awake and remain alert. How could he be so stupid? Horst thought, suppressing his anger, and sleeping in daylight for all to see. Quietly, Horst opened the door and then slammed it, the sound reverberating through the car and startling his driver. Köhler! Horst shouted. Wake up, you imbecile! Can't you see it's broad daylight? He leaned in through the open passenger window, fixing his gaze on the hapless chauffeur, his mere presence trapping the men in the confines of the car. Köhler was shocked by what he saw and squirmed in his seat.
Mm-hmm. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, 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 dun. And he actually gives him a slap. Very egotistical and opportunistic.
And your life now in Winnipeg.
This fundraising campaign has kept me quite busy.
And your Indiegogo campaign to bring stealth up to, well, you could tell us the cover design, and what else are you going to use the funds for?
The funds are for, like you said, cover design, some promotion, obviously the printing of paperbacks, copy editing, huge. A lot of indie writers tend to skip that part of the novel writing process, and you definitely need a professional editor to go through your manuscript to make sure that take a lot of grammatical errors out, and that is the best it can possibly be. So yeah, those are some of the things that are behind the scenes that people don't realize.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Well, thank you. Is there anything?
Thanks for making pen for hosting.
I think we know who Robert Stermscheg is now. Thank you, and we'll see you again soon. Have a great weekend.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah.